it always sounds so innocent. Someone leans in, lowers their voice just a little, and says, "Can I give you some feedback?" And sure, you nod. Maybe you even smile. But somewhere in your body, something tightens. You already know this isn't going to be about your best work. It rarely is. And in that split second, between the question and the answer, something happens. You either brace, or you perform, or you shut down. Not because you're fragile, but because feedback, even when it's well meant, rarely lands where it's supposed to. So the real question becomes this: how do you actually deal with feedback? Not the theory, not the version where everyone's calm, emotionally intelligent, and has time to reflect. No. I mean the version where it's fast, where it's blunt, where someone just said, "Yeah, this doesn't work," and moved on. That version. Because how you respond to that kind of feedback says everything. Let me take you back to an ordinary Tuesday in an advertising agency that was anything but ordinary. We had 120 people, all juggling campaigns, deadlines, and last-minute chaos. Some projects took months, some came in that morning, and were already overdue. And in the middle of that noise, pressure, and moving targets, there was one constant. It all started with an idea. But not just any idea. It had to be brilliant, fresh, strategic, on brand, on brief, and on time. And by on time, I mean now. Whether it was early morning or late at night, you had to show up with something that could blow people away. Because if you didn't, there were about 4,000 other agencies who would gladly take your spot in the client's budget. So you gather your creative team, 5 or 6 people, each pulling in different directions, each with their own voice, energy, and vision. You give them a few hours, maybe less, and then the show began. One by one, ideas would be pitched. No PowerPoint, no room for theatrical build-up, just raw ideas on the table, and 2 minutes to make your case. And then came the feedback. This one's too soft. That one doesn't fit. We've seen this before. Come on, you can't be serious. Safe, boring, next. No sugarcoating, no polite applause. Just quick decisions from someone who had seen thousands of ideas before and who had 5 minutes to pick one that might save the pitch. Within 10 minutes, 5 ideas were out. One, if you were lucky, would stay in the running. Now imagine doing that every day. Not once in a while, not when the stars align. Every single day of the year. And in that environment, feedback isn't a luxury, it's survival. But here's where it gets dangerous. Because when you're young, when you're still learning how to navigate your own sense of worth, you often fall into one of the most damaging traps in the creative industry. You start to believe that you are what you make. And if that's true, if your idea is you, then every no isn't just a rejection of your concept. It's a rejection of you, of your value, of your identity. And that's when things start to break. Not because your idea was bad, but because you weren't taught to separate who you are from what you do. And I've seen it happen again and again. Brilliant designers, thinkers, creatives, burning out, shutting down, walking away from work they love because someone said, "Next," a little too quickly. That's why, in my agency, I didn't just invest in talent. I invested in resilience, especially in the ones who had just left school, still wide-eyed and full of fire, but also full of attachment, because no one had ever told them, you are not your work. And if no one tells you that early enough, the industry will do it for you, harshly. So that's where we begin. Because before we can talk about how to take feedback, we need to unlearn the idea that what you produce defines who you are. And until you do that, every comment, every critique, every client reaction will hit deeper than it should, and it will keep hitting. until you draw the line. Once you start to see the difference between who you are and what you make, something interesting happens. You don't stop caring, but you do stop bleeding every time someone doesn't like your work. And that shift, that's where real creative freedom begins. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because for most people, feedback still feels like a slap in the face, especially when it comes fast, raw, and without a compliment to cushion the blow. That's when you start to tense up, second guess yourself, and play it safe. And the problem isn't that someone didn't like your idea. The problem is that you took it personally, because somewhere deep down, you made that idea part of your identity. We all do it. It's human. When you pour your time, energy, creativity, and care into something, and then someone dismisses it in 10 seconds, it stings. Not just because of the work, but because of what it represents. All the unseen hours, the inner dialogue, the risk, the hope that this one might land. And yet, if we zoom out for just a moment, we know this isn't new. As kids, we learned everything through feedback. You try to walk, you fall. You try again. That feedback didn't make you feel worthless. It just taught you what didn't work. You adjusted. And slowly you got it. But then we grew up, got jobs, got opinions, got egos. And somewhere along the line, feedback stopped being information and started sounding like judgment. And here's the twist. It's still just information. Not always accurate, not always kind, but always pointing to something worth looking at. Maybe your idea really didn't land. Maybe it wasn't the right fit for this client, or this timing, or this brand. Or maybe it was great, but the person across the table didn't get it, or didn't like you, or had a headache. That happens too. Because feedback doesn't come from a neutral space. It comes through people. People are messy. They carry stress, ego, pressure, bias, blind spots, and agendas. Which means that feedback is always filtered, always subjective. So how do you deal with that? By not giving it more weight than it deserves. If you learn to treat feedback as input, not identity, you take the power back. You stop crumbling every time someone says no. You stop swinging wildly between I'm a genius and I'm garbage. You start asking better questions. Not, am I good enough? But what can I use here? And just as importantly, what can I leave? Because not all feedback is useful. And not all rejection is a reflection of your value. Sometimes it's just part of the process. And that process, it's where you grow, not in the comfort of applause, but in the tension of friction. The space where things don't land, and you have to figure out why, or decide it doesn't matter. That's where you develop creative maturity. Not by being perfect, but by being honest, curious, willing to look at your own work without flinching, willing to take what serves you and leave the rest behind. And the more you practice that, the more freedom you feel. Not just in your work, but in yourself. Because the moment you stop tying your self-worth to someone else's reaction, that's when you finally get to create without fear. Eventually, you learn to hear the word no without twitching. Not because it stops stinging, but because you felt it often enough to stop making it mean something it doesn't. It's just part of the rhythm. One idea goes down, another comes up. Some days you hit the mark, most days you miss. And if you hang around long enough, you realize the job was never about getting it perfect. The job was learning how to recover, quickly, quietly, without drama. And that's not something they teach you in school. No one tells you that part. That a client's silence, or a colleague's shrug, or a creative director who waves you off halfway through your sentence, none of that is personal. But you treat it like it is. Because you poured yourself into something. Because for a moment, that idea was yours, and now it's on the floor. And it's tempting in that moment to make it about more than it is, to read between the lines, to assign meaning. You don't say it out loud, but you feel it. That sinking thought. Maybe I'm just not good at this. But the thing is, you might be brilliant at this. That idea just didn't fit. Wrong timing, wrong context, wrong audience. Or maybe it just wasn't that great. And that's fine. You're allowed to make things that aren't that great. Because if you can't make bad things, you'll never make anything at all. The ones who last aren't the ones who nail it on the first try. They're the ones who survive the second, the third, the 10th try without losing themselves in the process. And that's what I've always tried to protect in the people I work with. That fragile space between identity and output. The part of them that wanted to believe in what they were making, but needed to learn not to collapse when someone didn't agree. Because the truth is, most of the feedback you get is filtered. It comes through someone else's eyes, ears, mood, pressure, ego, expectation. It's not a verdict, it's a reaction. And half the time, it has more to do with what the other person is carrying than with what you just said. That doesn't mean you ignore it, but it does mean you stop taking it as gospel. You listen, you sort, you move on. Because if you don't, you'll freeze. You'll start creating for approval instead of for clarity. And that's when your work gets safe, predictable, empty. Look, you're going to make things that don't land. That's guaranteed. The only question is what you do after that. Do you vanish into your own head? Do you spend 3 days rethinking your life choices? Or do you nod, take the hit, and build again? Because building again, that's where the shift happens. That's where you move from, I hope this is good enough, to let's see where this one takes me. And that shift, that's everything. At some point, it's not even about the project anymore. It's about your ability to stand back up without hardening, to stay open while things keep missing, to keep creating even when no one's clapping. That's the real work, and no one sees it, but you'll feel it, right there, in the part of you that no longer needs validation to know you're still a maker, because that's who you are. Not the thing you just made, not the comment you just heard, not the silence that followed. You're the one who makes, and that's more than enough.